lot of people texted in today, John, saying they don't care what any of you guys are saying. They're just not buying the Nelson Agholor. So are we just in that training camp mode where there's a guy who kind of sticks out, he's the story, and everybody's talking about him?
It's possible. I mean, I kind of agree until we see it for real. You can't believe it. But all you can do is report what's going on, and he's been a very solid practice player. You know, on the other hand, fans tend to like that. They've seen some bad moments from Nelson Agholor, so they're never going to think he can turn it around. But there's plenty of evidence of players doing exactly that. On the other hand, there's the Corey Clements of the world who has 124-yard run in the preseason game, and people want to give him a gold jacket. So I think that's the emotional nature of the fan. All I can say is, and I've been saying it throughout the summer, that if you're talking about all the little things a receiver needs to do, get separation, run routes, block, Nelson's a very, very good player. What he can't do is catch the ball consistently. Hasn't proven that, and that's the biggest part of it. But we've seen the light go on for many people with that kind of talent, and that's the Eagles' hope, obviously.
Yeah, I mean, it's the fool me once, shame on me, or fool me twice, shame on me theory, where they've seen Nelson burn them twice. I think one thing to consider that maybe hasn't been talked about a whole heck of a lot, John, is the expectations aren't there for him. Last year, he was the number 2 guy. They needed him. When you're a first-round pick, the expectations are always there. In year number 3, there's not a lot of expectations, right?
No, certainly not. I think there's expectations in the building. I don't think there's expectations from the fan base because of what you just mentioned and what has happened in the past. I mean, this is a team that's base offense, like most teams in the NFL now, is 3 receivers, 11 personnel. So you need, even though it's not that old school thinking of you need 2 receivers, you need 3. You probably need 4, in all honesty, that need to be productive. And as I said, the volume guys are going to be Alshon Jeffery and Nelson Agholor, not Alshon Jeffery and Torrey Smith. So the Eagles do need them to produce. And that was part of the gamble they did in getting rid of Jordan Matthews. But you got to give up something of value to get something of value. And they did so with not only Jordan, who's a productive guy, but also a third-round pick to get Ronald Darby.
When you look at Nelson in terms of, I don't know, percentage plays, how much playing time he's going to get, is he the guy there, or do you think he's in like a rotational situation?
No, I think he's the guy in the slot. I think, Doug likes to move his receivers around. So from that standpoint, he's a little more encouraged because he's got 2 guys he feels he can move to each position. So he can play the X, the Z, the slot, and so can Jeffrey at times. And that's something he hasn't had in the past. So he'll move around. But as I said, when you're looking at those 3 receivers, well, the Eagles played 11 personnel about 60 to 70% of the time last season. So you expect those guys, when they're healthy, when they're on the field, to play at least 60 to 70% of the snaps, and that's significant.
John McMullen's with us, 97.3 ESPN.com. He has been, one of the things I talk about with Agholor in terms of the perception of where he is now is you watch him for 2 training camps previously and had questions going in like, hey, this guy might not live up to the expectations, or maybe he isn't as good as we think. Did they have higher expectations for him last year, and I'm just not remembering that?
No, I think they had higher expectations last year because he was a first-round pick, and there's a lot of guys who struggle in their first season. We can go all around the league and list the names. So your hope is, and coaches constantly talk about the most improvement a player has is between the first year and the second year. So from their standpoint as well, they thought they were going to see a different Nelson Agholor last season, and they didn't. If anything, he got worse. And from a personal level, I think it was a mental thing. He sort of got the yips. He sort of lost confidence, and There are many times we can look at in the history of sports, not just football, where that's affected players. And some have never been able to overcome it. Others have. In practice, for the most part, Nelson has. But as I always say, he just doesn't have good natural hands. The best I've ever seen, I talk about it all the time, is Chris Carter. Odell Beckham, players like that, he doesn't catch the football effortlessly like they do, and he's never going to. So, but can he improve? Yes, he can certainly improve.
One thing is for sure that the expectations are a lot different for him now, being the third guy, potentially even further down the line in terms of the option on the offense. You would think Alshon's the guy, probably Ertz next in line, then probably Sproles, maybe even Torrey Smith ahead of him. He is way down the importance of this offense succeeding.
Yeah, I don't necessarily agree with that. I think when you look at the passing game, I think he's one of the guys they're going to count on. I always say 1A and 1B, depending on how it shakes out, are Jeffery and Ertz. After that, as far as the passing game goes, Nelson's next as far as volume goes, because Torrey Smith is not a volume guy. He's the guy you want catching the ball maybe 3-4 times a game, but you want to see 17, 18 yards per catch. And if you see that, he's doing his job. He's not going to be the guy who can move the change and be consistently creating separation. That's never been his role. That's not going to be his role here. So I think if you look at what Jordan was expected to do when he was here, he was going to be that next guy in line after Jeffery and Ertz, and that's where Agholor's got to fit in.
You look at this offense as a whole going forward. We had a text message that wanted to have us kind of talk about the upgrades or downgrades in terms of the units. Would you say the wide receiver unit, it has to be better than last year, right? That's not even a question. That's the biggest upgrade from one year to the next?
Yeah, I think it was bigger when Matthews was still here, obviously, but it's still big. I would argue that this was the worst receiving group in the NFL last season. So it was 32 out of 32. I really believe that. The fact that you have Alshon Jeffery alone takes you up significantly, probably 10 spots. You hope Smith contributes. You hope Agholor gets better. So it's no longer anywhere near the worst group in the NFL. I'm also not going to lie to you and tell you it's top half or certainly not top 10. There's still a lot of ways to go and a lot of improvement. The only guy you can look at in that receiving corps and say, okay, if he's on the field, he's going to produce is Alshon Jeffery.
What about Alshon Jeffery? What do you believe that he will do this year? We haven't seen a whole heck of a lot of them. Should we start to be concerned? He did get hurt. He's been hurt in the past. He got suspended last year. Is he, Andrew Bynum in this team right now?
No, he wanted to be here. That's number one. He turned down less money to come here, and he turned down more security to come here because he wanted to play with Carson Wentz and believes he can be a superstar quarterback, which on the back end will obviously help him. He wants to be here. He wants to play. He's certainly on a one-year deal, so he wants to be effective. I think he's like a lot of veteran players in this league. He doesn't believe he needs training camp all that much. I don't necessarily disagree with him, to be honest.
Right.
I look at all you have to do is look at the Miami Dolphins that were here this week for the joint practice sessions. We asked both Jay Cutler and Adam Gase, what do you think about Alshon from their history with him? And they looked at us like we're nuts. Mm-hmm. In fact, Cutler said, "You're worried about Alshon? Just throw him the ball. He's going to produce." And that pretty much sums it up.
Yeah, and I like to think that he's right. I'm a fan of Jeffrey's game in terms of what he did with Chicago. I liked him at South Carolina coming into the league. Some people would say, hey, he had his best years, though, when Brandon Marshall was there. Can he be a number one guy?
Yeah, he was the number one guy. It depends how you're right with the definition. Marshall was more of the volume guy, so he was but Jeffrey was the big play guy. and Jeffery was sort of the guy Cutler really developed a great relationship, especially the back shoulder fades that are indefensible. If Carson Wentz can perfect that throw, you see it all the time with Aaron Rodgers. Now, nobody's going to throw it that well, but if he can perfect that kind of throw, they have a play in their back pocket that they can go to any time on the field, and it's virtually indefensible.
Yeah, the route that we haven't seen since before McNabb, that throw the ball into the back of the end zone, let the guy go up there, right? I mean, we've been waiting for that route for years.
I mean that fade in general, he can do that as well. But I'm talking even more so. If you see Rodgers trying to get a first down,
right,
and he'll throw it to the back shoulder of Jordy Nelson to a point where, hey, Jordy's going to catch it or nobody else. That's what Cutler used to do with Alshon Jeffery. And it was arguably even more effective because despite all the criticism Jay Cutler gets, he can throw the football.
Yeah.
And that's the play that is really effective on an everyday offense that, forget the red zone. You got to move the chains to get to the red zone. And when you have the ability to do that, it doesn't matter how good the cornerback is. If you perfect that pass, as I said, there's nothing the defense can do.
In your mind, how important is Lane Johnson? He wrote the piece in the Players Tribune. He kind of said some interesting things, and we know the record with him last year and then without him. How important is he?
I think he's very important. I think he's one of the best 4 or 5 players on this team. So from that standpoint, and you saw it, I don't think that record that you mentioned, you can just automatically sort of expand it out and expect those kinds of wins because context comes into it, who you're playing, the schedule, how difficult a particular matchup is. But that's pretty clear. I mean, the Eagles finished 7-9 last year without Lane Johnson playing all those games, and you would have to believe if he was out there, that gets you an extra win or two. And if you're at an extra win or two last year, with the worst receiving group in the NFL, you're in the playoff hunt.
Yeah.
So if he's able to play 16 games and you've added elsewhere, that's why people have such promise for this team.
Yeah, the 7-9, you can look at it two ways: as either disappointing or better than you thought they would be, and that they added a lot. That you would hope that they could flip. I heard I was watching the Hard Knocks last night. I was catching up on them. I guess this was from the first episode when John Gruden was visiting Tampa Bay camp, and he said it's a fine line between 6-10 and 10-6, right? Just a couple plays, 4 or 5 plays throughout the course of the year.
Yeah, I mean the difference between 6-10, 10-6, 8-8, 7-9, all those types of records. You're talking about 3 or 4 players, 3 or 4 big plays. That's how close this league is. They talk about the parity all the time. And to lose one of your best players for that significant portion of time, whether it's from suspension or injury, that's the thing that can kind of turn a successful season into an unsuccessful one. And remember, the Eagles had a rookie quarterback last year who didn't have a training camp, who didn't know he was going to start until 8 days before the regular season. The good early start raised expectations to a ludicrous degree. I remember on this very show when the Eagles made the trade, I thought the Eagles would win 4 or 5 games. So I don't know how anyone looks at that type of situation and says Philadelphia should have won 10 or 11 last year. I thought, if anything, they overachieved.
Absolutely. I think that fresh start, right, made the expectations for everything bigger, including the quarterback. And I guess that's why you look in year number 2 and you're hopeful for a big kind of takeoff this year. Is that based on the start or based on the complete package of last year?
Well, I think it's based on a lot of things. I think it's based on Carson as a player, his ability to sort of he's got that gym rat mentality of always studying, first guy in the building, all that kind of stuff, always looking at film. So that's part of it. And then the fact that he had so much success with such a bad receiving group, as I said. And you kind of spin that off. Well, what if they were average? Where are the Eagles? Forget about above average or forget about really good. Where would they be? And that's what people are saying. The Eagles needed to build up around Carson Wentz. Yeah. Everyone knew it. They knew it. They did it to a certain degree. It's still a work in progress. There's still plenty of places to improve, but they've certainly improved.
A GM said these are from ESPN.com's tier rankings. They have Wentz ranked at number 21 overall in the league, which a little bit lower on the list than maybe you would have liked. But one GM said Wentz, I think, is a 2 and has a chance of being a 1 this year. What I saw last year, he is exactly what you're looking for: toughness, movement, arm, quickness, decisiveness, accuracy. I think he is, of all the young quarterbacks in the league, the pick of the litter. The Eagles are hopeful, obviously, that that's the case. But are you seeing that what the GM's saying there, the toughness, all that stuff, has it all kind of made that big jump, as you suggest, from year 1 to year 2?
Yeah, I think so. And we'll see. I think, you mentioned a couple of days ago, what can you take out of the preseason? I think if you look at the Green Bay game specifically, he's only out there for one drive, but you saw Clay Matthews come wide open on a blitz, and I always, Dom Capers was blitzing like it was a Super Bowl. It was ludicrous to begin with, but you just see Carson on that play, and he showed so many things. The fact that he had the strength to shake off Clay Matthews. He had the wherewithal to keep his eyes down the field, which is sort of a DNA thing with quarterbacks, and if they immediately the eyes go down when they get the pressure, you can write that guy off. And Carson has the ability to keep his eyes downfield. You saw the accuracy hitting Mac Hollins in stride, and all of a sudden you got a touchdown. Yeah. So those are the kind of things. It's not the point. Obviously, you love to get 7 points, 6 points. I didn't get the 2-point conversion, but that kind of stuff you don't worry about in the preseason. If that pass was incomplete because Mac dropped it, or something of that nature, you still saw all that good stuff with Carson Wentz and his ability to extend the play and keep his eyes downfield. And that's all the positive stuff people are talking about with him.
John McMullen, 97.3 ESPN.com, at JF McMullen on Twitter. And don't forget, read his national column at FanRag Sports NFL. And check out John every day right here on the Sports Bash. Thanks, pal.
Hey, thank you, Mike.